Hey, what's up, guys? In my big and long coaching experience, I realized that you actually hate to play against the French opening. Most of my students who are just beginners or medium level players, they hate to play against French and they don't know how to play against it because it's the only semi opening or semi open type of the game against e4, and you just have to deal with the pawn chain. You just have to deal with a close type of the games, and you gotta also show like some sort of positional skills. This video I'm making for my big friend Kate, and we met each other in Tulum with the Chessable guys, and we had a great time there. We had a lesson 2 days ago, and he told me, Mayo, I don't know how to play against French. I simply hated opening. And I thought about that thing, and I thought, like, is there any possibility that we can open up the game and attack the French and game not to be closed in its typical fashion? And here we go. I just want to show you what's happening there. Unlike other variations, here I'm just going to show you like more of games by strong players and guys who are just gurus for this variation with a white piece. So let's go. This is a very easy and a simple attacking plan for white. Let's get started. After we play knight c3, there are two moves: bishop b4 or knight f6. By default, when they play Steinitz variation with a knight f6, you guys probably think e5. e5 is the main move. Objectively speaking, that's the best one. But just like I told you, I want to give you something else. So you just go with e takes d5. What's the point of this? You're just changing the direction of this opening, and you just want to play a pretty open game. After e takes d5, you've just solved a problem of the weakest piece in the French. It's the light square bishop that is usually locked and weak. Here, it's all of a sudden active. But let me just show you the plan, and that is very characteristic for this system. It's bishop g5. Bishop g5, you just pin the knight and prepare yourself for queen d2. So after bishop e7, queen d2, and long castle. What I like about this position, it's already a type of the game with the opposite side castles. And here, we're going to take a look at two games of my ex-student, world champion under 16, Giovanna Rappert, wife of Richard Rappert. And we're going to see game of Nigel Short, always very resourceful and a creative chess player. So, in this game, Short's opponent went for knight c6. What is he doing? Nothing special. He's just developing his piece. You carry on with your plan f3. The idea of f3 is to control both e4 and g4, to kind of limit the light square bishop, and to go with h4 and g4 afterwards. Here, Nigel Short went for h4, played rook to e1. Usually this rook goes on e1, and it's just pressuring bishop on e7. After like rook b8, you just go with g4. All of a sudden, white has a very nice, smooth, and easy to follow attack. Short's opponent played b4. Short put his knight on the rim of the board, but just for a moment. And after knight a5, since black threatened both bishop d7 and knight c4, Short decided to kill both at the same time with b3. No more knight c4, while at the same time he defends this knight. After bishop d7, knight c5, so he now challenged his opponent to take, in which case he would go with queen e4 or queen d4, knight h3, knight f4, knight h5, and stuff like that. Here, knight on f6 would be weak and would be almost defenseless. After bishop e5, Short played knight e2, not because he wanted to do anything else, but because his knight goes towards f5, harassing this bishop. Knight b7 captured, played knight g3, and his opponent played pretty smart move to stop knight f5. Short played bishop to d3 and finished his opponent in just 3 moves. Rook e7, and that's one of the most typical tactics in these positions, because after queen e7, knight h5, he now threatened bishop f6 followed by queen h6. So after rook b6, played bishop f6 and his opponent resigned. Why? Because if g takes, queen h6 is mate, to unavoidable mates. Or if rook f6, just a beautiful one with a queen g5, and he can't stop mate on g7. Or if he plays g6, he's gonna lose the rook. Or if he plays like rook g6, he's gonna win the queen on e7. That's a very nice game of Nigel Short. Let me just show you game of Jovana Rappert. Just like I told you, my ex-student, she played 2 games in this one. One of her opponents played bishop f5. I put a red circle on this bishop because it doesn't belong there. It's a weak piece. Why? Because anyways, our plan is f3 followed by g4. So after knight bd7, g4, bishop e6, h4, and knight h3. I have to tell you what should be the white's plan. King b1, knight f4, h5 followed by h6, weakening on the dark squares, pressuring this bishop on e6 with a great, really great game for white afterwards. And what makes it even better, very easy game. So after bishop f5, f3, instead of knight b7, Jovana's opponent went for c6. She went for g4, h4, and all of a sudden started to push all these pawns onto the king's side. At the moment, h5 was threatened to win the bishop. So after h6, you always have to know, yes, they just created a shelter to run away, but at the same time created a weakness, because now you're going to have g5 in an easier fashion. After knight e8, she played knight h3, her opponent captured, and she played g5. After captured, she captured, took by knight, and just like you see, she just defended this knight, dragged this queen on h2, and mated her opponent. What a nice and easy games against black players, with what I like about this position the most, an extremely simple and straightforward plan by white. So let me just show you, instead of these variations, what happened in a few games of mine. After knight f6, you take, bishop g5, bishop e7, queen d2, castles, long castles, and for example, they go c6. So I'll tell you something. These type of systems are so good for blitz and so good for faster time controls, because plans are easy and you attack all the time. So when you go with bishop to d3, they go b5. That's a normal plan. When they play c6, they would just want to go with b5 and want to launch some sort of attack on the king's side. Rook e1 is a nice thing, because sooner or later you're just making pressure against the bishop. Knight bd7 and knight on f3. What's so special about knight f3? Why not knight g2? Because your knight can go on e5 if needed, and your queen is gonna go on f4 and h4 if needed. After a5, queen f4. Look at this one. Now you want to double up your rooks on the e file. You want to transpose your queen onto the h file, and you want to attack. I want to show you a game of mine. g6, I don't know, just to stop queen h4 ideas with the attack on h7, rook takes e7. Then you involve another rook, and then you play queen h4. Your opponent can't stop knight e5, removing the knight on d7 as defender and winning the knight on f6 eventually. h6 instead of g6, no big deal. You just take. You just go knight g5, and they do not have time for bishop f8 because bishop h7 and knight f7 mate. If they go knight f8, you just go with a rook lifting. Of course, place one more piece into the attack, and mate is unavoidable. And if rook e8, you just go h4, you just go g4, and you don't care if they take, because you're going to take by pawn, bring your queen back, and mate the king. What a nice and easy ways to attack the French. And keep in mind, the game is not closed. So that's important, and hope that my student Katie is gonna like it so much. After knight c3, instead of knight f6, bishop b4. Also, from my big coaching experience, I realized that bigger problems white players had against bishop to b4. Absolutely the simple approach, the same approach. You take on d5, and just once again, I'm telling you, you're just changing the direction of the game. When they play, and everybody would play in order to open the light square bishop, you just go bishop to d3. Somebody asked me, what if queen d5? I remember Michal Tal once played it when he was younger. Queen d5, nothing. You just play knight f3, bishop d3, castles, and now you threaten to win the queen. They gotta give it up. And afterwards, you play c4 followed by bishop e2 with ideas, doing the minority attack with a4 and a5, with the bishop pair, with a threat of knight e5 to trap the queen on the spot. Basically, what is just so much better. So they gotta take by pawn, and you play bishop to d3. You just continue a very similar plan to what we've seen. And main move here is knight c6. For example, I used to be a French player, and all my French students I teach to play knight c6. It doesn't look that illogical, but you just attack the pawn on d4 and keep on developing yourself. It's known ever since from Nimzovich in his book My System. If they go with knight e7, I don't want to bother you. They just want to go with the bishop f5, exchanging the bishop pair and playing short castle, but you just reject both with the queen on h5. You can't play short castle because of mate on h7, and you can't play bishop f5. If they go with, instead of that, knight f6, I'll show the game of Magnus Carlsen against best Spanish player Vallejo. Knight g2, played castle, and Vallejo played bishop g4. This is this is just an idea that you think he wants to pin the knight. No, he wants to retreat this bishop back to h5 and g6 and exchange the light square bishops and exchange the bishop pair. Magnus went for this, played knight f4, and here he opted for knight takes g6, and he was afraid of bishop c3 with a reason, because position is quite blocked. And if black takes on c3, he's going to have the bishop pair, but we'll have lots of problems and how to break the pawn structure. Magnus now played knight e2, and after rook e8, played bishop g5, pinning this knight. You don't see anything in horizon, I know. So after bishop e7, Magnus played knight g3, played f4, played queen to f3, and now bishop on g5 is untouchable. If f6 happens, he would just take on g6 and absolutely destroy his defense. And after c6, because he now threatens the pawn, he played h4, rook d on f8, played rook a to e1, and absolutely in a razor kingside attack, killed this guy. Let me just show you a few more moves. In the game was queen c7, Magnus exchanged, stuck his rook on e5, took on e7, and played h5. Took by queen, played knight f5, threatening knight h6, and in this position, he just managed to kill his opponent by rook h1, nice knight on e5, and open h-file. Of course, I just showed you this game a little bit faster than I was supposed to, but you know what? This was Magnus Carlsen, and believe me, he rarely makes mistakes. And if bishop d3, what happens if they just go with knight c6? You always play a3, and you always provoke them to take. They cannot go back here because you just take on d5, but you can also play knight g2, so they always take. They're happy to take. You gotta understand one thing about these type of games. In these type of games, you have a broken pawn structure, which is your weakness, but you got a bishop pair, which is your advantage. What does it mean? You either have to open up the game or keep it open at all costs, or you just have to somehow organize the kingside attack. For your level, for most of you, I know that most of your opponents will go with knight f6, and I'll go with that in the end of everything. On top level, most of these guys play knight g on e7 or bishop e6. Bishop e6 with the idea to go with queen d7, bishop f5, exchanging the bishop pair, or knight e7 followed by bishop f5. Any bishop e6, a golden rule is place the rook on the open file and attack the pawn, create weakness on the light squares. So when they play b6, you just go with knight to e2. When they go with queen d7 to exchange the light square bishops, should you stop that? Not. Just continue to play and to develop yourself. So after bishop f5, you go knight g3. You know, harass this bishop. They gotta take, and you take by pawns. Why? You're fixing a little bit your pawn structure. It looks a little bit better than pawns c2, c3, and d4. But still, what's the plan? Any long castle, you just go with a4 and create a kingside attack. But most of the guys just go with the knight g7, and they don't even dream what is going to happen. If I tell you that I probably won 20 games, 30, 50 games like this with the white pieces, you won't believe. But also I have to tell you that I lost 2 or 3 games because I keep forgetting the same trick. So the thing is, knight comes to an h5. Nobody sees what's the threat and what is coming. So after knight h5, they all go with castle. And da-da-da-da, bishop h6. So take a look at this one. They can't touch the bishop because of knight f6 fork, and you win the queen. Or if they go g6, you just go with knight f6 once again. If they go knight f5, you just go bishop g7 once again, and they can't take by knight because you once again go with a fork. What a beautiful trick with the bishop h6. Another thing is knight g7. I've seen it so many times. It's a classic approach because they would like to exchange the bishop pair. You just go queen h5 to stop bishop f5, to prevent short castle, and to create certain problems to the black players. Here, I very much like to follow games and approach by Grandmaster Igor Glak. So after bishop e6, rook b1. You know the rule. b7 is weak. Place your rook and weaken the light squares. So when they play b6, knight f3. The point of knight f3 is to, stop for the time being bishop f5 or bishop g4. And now you're wondering, so how do we stop that? Playing knight g5. So you can't play bishop f5 or bishop g4 because f7 would be hanging. And I'll show you the game between Glak and Jorhus. So after long castles, Glak captured, played bishop e3, g6, and played knight f5. He played castles, knight e3, rook e1, played queen d6, and took by pawn in order to play e4 or c4 to open up the game, and bishop is going to be a little bit better because of the weakness on the light squares than knight. Black goes with f5 to stop e4, but after c4, he now has a more pleasant game. The thing is, they do not have knight e4 to take because of check, and bishop a6, for example. And the thing is, if king b8, bishop b5, c4 followed by c5. He had a much better game, and white has a pretty simple middle game afterwards. After knight g5, there are guys who would immediately play g6, queen f3. They still have problems to play a long castle and stuff like that because f7 is weak, e6 is weak, and Skripchenko played against Makricyan in European Championship many years ago, but then after g4 realized that she couldn't take because of queen f7. So she wasted her time and then brought a bishop back, and after bishop a6, not to allow castle, played knight a6, played king d1 to play rook e1, played rook e1, jumped with the bishop on f4, and had an amazing initiative and won the game a couple moves later. All things considered, if you ask me, probably the most common thing that is going to happen on your level is knight f6. Simply, most of your opponents will think, let's just go and keep on developing our pieces. Guys, just follow your plans. So I'm not teaching you here to learn anything specific. Just learn the very universal type of the plan. So what's that? You play knight e2, keeping both of these bishops open. And when they play castle, you go with short castle. So what's your plan? And let me just show you. Igor Glak won the following game against Grandmaster. This guy played bishop g4. Once again, it's not only to pin the knight and the queen, but more importantly to go after f3 with the bishop h5, bishop g6. Glak played f3, bishop g5, and played bishop g5. After bishop g6, played rook b1. He always likes to do this move. Another option was f4 with the idea f5, and whenever you take, he would take by queen, go with f5, while the knight would go with this. Knight g3, knight h5, and then they would have problems because they don't have the dark square bishop to keep an eye on the knight on f6. That's a very nice plan. If rook b1, b6, rook b5, threatened the pawn on d5, rook e8, played knight g3, took on f6, took the pawn, and afterwards play that famous f4 move to play that. So when they take, you just take by queen, and you're up a pawn, and you just have an easily technically winning game. So once again, those who play knight f6, you go knight e2, you go castle, and you just want to go with knight g3, h3, and queen f3. You're probably wondering, why do I say knight g3 and h3? For example, take a look at the following game. If rook e8 places the rook on the open file, this grandmaster played knight g3. FIDE from Turkey plays knight g3. Nothing that obvious. h6 stops bishop g5 and looks very illogical because it prevents bishop g5. And now what are you gonna do with these two bishops? They look good, but how to take advantage of them? I very much like his plan, and this is something that I can, suggest you with a big pleasure and expectations to win your games in a very, very simple fashion. f4 makes no sense. I know at first glance because you block the dark square bishop. And you're probably wondering, so what's the point? The point is to push this pawn up to f5, exchange knights by knight h5, and then all of a sudden, by involving the rook onto the third rank, go with a kingside action. After bishop g4, Burak played queen d2, and after bishop d7, played f5. So now he opens up the diagonal, but of course he's not crazy to sack the queen. So after this, plays queen f4, wants to place the queen on h4. That's what he did. And after this guy played c5, bishop takes h6. What a simple plan to attack on the king side. After g takes, queen takes, goes with knight h5, plays f6, threatens queen h7 mate, and after knight f6, played rook f6, and black resigned. He beat an IM so easily in 20 moves, and he didn't do anything that special. If you look at this game, it just looked nice because of a nice plan. So once again, those who do knight f6 play knight e2, castle, and for example, knight a5. Makes sense to play knight a5 because it blocks c4, fixing the pawn structure and undoubling these pawns. Then you go with the knight g3, and they go bishop g4. For example, if they ever go with rook 8, just watch out not to make one mistake. Watch out not in some of these positions to play queen f3 without h3, because bishop g4 almost traps the queen. Not, like completely, but almost. Then you would have to play queen f4. Always play h3 and then go with the queen on here. You just want to play bishop g5. You just want to go knight h5 and just storm all your pieces onto the king side. After the knight g4, you play f3. And now Igor Glek beat Simon Williams. You know the Ginger GM. They played this game like 20 years ago. But here, you absolutely have a possibility to do what FIDE did in his game, playing like this. And then you want to go f5, and then you want to go knight h5, and then if bishop g4, you just go here, and you want to go f5, you want to kill this bishop. They would have to move it, in which case you just play f5. You can just play queen f4, queen h4, bishop g5, knight h5. What a nice plan. I really, really adore this plan. So, guys, hopefully you're just going to enjoy these easy attacking plans by white. And finally, to take a deep breath before you play your games and say, now I'm finally ready to crush my opponents against the French opening, because game is not closed. We won't play e5 here. We won't play against Steinitz variation e5, but in both of these cases, bishop before we take on d5, or if they play Steinitz variation, we take on d5 followed by bishop g5. Hope that you enjoyed this lecture, and hopefully you're gonna have much more wins with these openings. Bye bye.